As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. This is the lectionary vlog for the 30th of August, 2020. And this is the 24th vlog that I've done with you, 24 straight weeks. We had one guest, Judge Jesse Caldwell, great week. So I've done 23 of 24. And it's such a joy and an honor for you to spend, for me to spend this time with you, to have you invest your time in this little time together as we look at the lectionary readings. And I'm here to help you as preachers see some of the images and read the Bible semiotically, a biblical semiotics that we're working with here and playing with. But we've been beginning this past month by lighting a candle from a sacred scent around the world. And this is from a company in the United Kingdom called True Grace. Isn't that a great company? True Grace. And this is their sacristy candle. And I've never smelled this before, so I'm smelling it now with you for the first time. This is called their sacristy candle. Oh, and you can really smell the incense. I'm going to enjoy that as we're talking together about these texts for today. We're going to be smelling this scent of the sacristy, which is all about preparation. That's what I'm helping you to do, is to prepare yourself for the preaching, this high calling of our preaching. I am going to suggest that you preach from the Exodus text, the story of the burning bush. But I want to look at the others really briefly first, and then we'll really invest our time in the Exodus 3 chapter. But our psalm is Psalm 105. This is a great psalm that I love, and because it kind of instructs us in what does it mean to proclaim the name of God and to lean on that name. Give thanks to the Lord. Call on God's name. Make known among the nations what God has done, not what we've done. Sing to him. Sing praise to him. Tell of all his wonderful acts. Glory in his holy name. Glory in the name of God. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord and his strength. Seek his face always. It goes on. And this is a great psalm. Remember, all the psalms are chanted. So that is something that you could, based actually on the Exodus, where what is your name? Exchange takes place, and God gives Moses as close to the naming of who God is as we are going to get anywhere in the scriptures, except until Jesus comes. But the epistle reading is from the book of Romans, and this is Romans 12, and it's important for us. This is so important for us to remember that faith is something that is not just in the head, but and not just in the heart, it's also in the hands. And so it employs all three. And so Paul is telling what it means to put love in action, what it means to take love from the status quo and move it to the edges and the boundaries. And he got this incredible litany here about what that means. And we could spend the whole time. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor others above yourself. Be zealous. but make the zeal about Jesus. I love that one. Be joyful in hope. Be patient in affliction. Be faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people in need. Practice hospitality. Bless and do not curse those who persecute you. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony and peace with one another as far as it depends on you. We've all had some difficult neighbors, as best as you can. Do not be proud. Associate with people that are of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay evil for evil, but overcome evil with good, and so on. I mean, this is a great litany here, and I love this passage, but we're not going to do it. But it is, what does it mean to move love from just a word thing, a rhetoric, into a reality where the rubber hits the road? The gospel reading is from Matthew, and this is Matthew 16, where Jesus is predicting his death and explaining what it means when he moves to the center. And I'm going to come back at this, but I want you to hear this. He moves to the center. In other words, he's saying he's going to move to Jerusalem. And what that means, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the center. Some maps actually have Jerusalem as the center of the world. That he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law. And this is where we are being told, as Peter rebukes Jesus. Can you imagine it? You don't know what you're talking about, Jesus. Just don't even talk about this. And Jesus says, stand behind me. And then he says this to all of his disciples: if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. This is the real meaning of what it means to accept Jesus into your heart. It's not just meaning of, you're not just accepting Jesus into your heart and saying, yes, I believe these things. No, be live in these things. Not believe, be live in your faith. And you do certain things. I mean, you take up your cross, you follow. So accepting into your heart really means take up your cross and follow him. And this is where I want to get back to the original, the First Testament reading for today that's suggested in the lectionary, which is Genesis 3. And I'm just going to read this. I want you to hear this again as if for the first time. Genesis 3, 1 to 15, one of the great passages of Scripture. And the story of Moses and the burning bush. So where are we? Exodus 3. Why did I go to Genesis? Exodus 3, 1 to 15. There we go. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. So here's a shepherd who's also a priest, a Levite. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, I want you to hear, he led the flock where? To the far side of the desert, to the edges, to the margins, to the peripheries. And he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look. So he's not only taken the flock to the far side of the desert, to the margins, but when he sees this flames coming out of this bush that's on the side of this mountain, he doesn't run away from it. He even goes closer to it. Great story of Moses begins here. This is one of the great moments, the moment of the burning bush. But there's another moment that also occurs on Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai. And that's Moses' smoking mountain when he comes down with the Ten Commandments. There are some suggestions that this Mount St. Helens, when it blew, a volcano, it blew from the side. It didn't blow from the top, it blew from the side. Volcanoes, these mountains can burn and blow from every side, including the top. And it may have been that this Mount Sinai was really, part of what's going on is God's appearing in the midst of I wish I'd thought about this when I wrote my book, Rings of Fire, about the volcanoes that are erupting in the world today. But here are some of the greatest revelations, the greatest epiphanies take place in the midst of blowing volcanoes, blowing mountains. Here's a mountain that is burning bushes, burning coals, smoking mountains. And the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, and God called him from within the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. And then God says, okay, you've come far enough. Don't come any closer. Take off your shoes, your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And this is where God tells Moses, your mission now is to go free the slaves. You're now an abolitionist. You're in emancipation business. That's your mission. Go free the slaves. He did not have this revelation. This burning bush would never have happened until he took the flock to the edges, the far side of the mountain. And I think it is so important that I may develop this further in a Napkin Scribbles podcast, because we don't have time to go into it today. But it is time that we understand that if you're going to follow Jesus and take up your cross, you're always going to be on the edge. We are edge people. We are edgy people. We are people on the edge. Now, which edge is the question? Okay? And I've categorized 4 different edges. There's the leading edge, the cutting edge, the bleeding edge, and the ledge edge. And that's the edge of the martyrs. But the 4 different edges. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you are an edge person. In our normal state, we humans are really a herding species, like other mammals. But Jesus calls us out from the norm. You can't be normal and be a follower of Jesus. In fact, the only hope for humanity as a species is that we are not total herding species, because herds will go right off a cliff. I mean, they'll just follow the lead and they'll just go off a cliff. And you wonder what's going on in the world today, and people are just falling off of cliffs because everybody's doing it, and let's just go with it. And I mean, don't get me into Cardi B right now. I mean, don't even get me going there about everybody's all falling off of that cliff following. Are you kidding me? We've made pornography the norm. No, I don't want to go there. But when does pornography become the norm of a culture? I mean, I thought WIP meant worship and praise, but I've got a whole education that I've been subject to in the past week. Oh no. We have been called to be edge people. The prophethood of all believers. Not just some people are prophets. God called every one of you, every one of your people, as God is called to be a prophet. Not just a priest, a prophet. To be a maverick. To have the courage and the chutzpah to separate from the herd and to go off in new directions and have new experience, leave the pack behind, create a whole new herding movement around truth, around beauty, around goodness. And then you call for the pack to join you. And a herding for life, not a herding for hatred. and hurting for death and hurting for inertia. So sometimes in your life, God's going to call you to be on the leading edge, sometimes the cutting edge, sometimes the bleeding edge, and a few maybe on the ledge edge. But, and maybe different times in your life, you're on different edges, depending on what your mission is. But whatever edge you're on, it's a charge to keep I have, a God to glorify. And this is hard for us to hear. I mean, to talk about edge people, because we have been for the past, as long as we've had leadership culture and this leadership fetish, we've been all about the center. Oh, we have so idolized and idealized the center. We love the center. We want to do center, and it's all about the center and some imagined magnificent magnetic center. I mean, about the only E.M. Forster, 1910, Howard's End, only connect. That's been one of the most quoted lines of the past 50 years. The only, maybe competing with that, though, was William Butler Yeats's 1919, both from the same decade. And I'm going to give you the full quote. We all hear the center does not hold, that line, but it's said by the falconer. But here's, things fall apart, the center cannot hold, anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dim tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. And so we've been all about this center. You've heard about centering prayer and just got to center down, and you got to find your center, and Jesus is my center. And all of that is dangerous, because Jesus is never found at the center. He didn't spend his life at the center. If he had been, he'd never left Jerusalem. He's not the center of power. He's not the center of politics. He's not the center of economics. He's not at the center of anything. He didn't choose his disciples from the center. He chose them from the edges, from the margins. That's where he's spending his time. That's where he spent his whole ministry, on the edge, with edge people, with edgy people. And we have so idolized the center. When someone is criticized for being all over the place, I want to respond, that's a nice compliment. I mean, I love that. I want to be all over the place. You don't want to be all over the place? Einstein believed that his greatest contribution was actually, maybe, not his theory of relativity and all that other stuff, but it's field thinking, or I call it all over the place thinking, rather than linear, line by line, bullet point thinking. No, you think in fields. Like I read a page in fields. I don't read line by line, I read fields. And what does it mean to think in fields? And that's what, we don't want to be all over the place. Do we? Don't we want to be all over the place in a world where any place can be every place? Jesus is not one point. He's not one center. He's not some target. He's not an unmoving center. He's not a single place. Jesus is a way of living, a life story. When somebody says, Jesus is my center, I would say, what's your circumference? I mean, if he's your center, then who's your circumference? No. Jesus is our everything. Jesus is found in the circumferences, the peripheries, the margins, even more than the center. Jesus is all over the place, and we need to be where Jesus is, all over the place. He decenters us, actually, and moves us away from the center into the outliers and the edges and the margins. So dead center is off center. Dead center is off the mark. Is you might even say, the problem with, we need decentering prayer, because when we talk about centering prayer, it means mainly going into yourself and focusing on yourself. And no. We need to decenter our lives and to join Jesus where he is, which is on the margins. So, I mean, you're already seeing this, the problem with the center. When anybody builds anything and names it a center, you know what it's not. Oh, we've got a center for the arts. Well, you know it's not the center then. If you name it the center, it's not the center of that university. It's not the center of that life. And even churches, they don't have just one. They have a worship center, but they've got a family life center. They've got multiple centers. I mean, so even when we're using the center language, we can't honor it because we understand that there are many, many centers. I mean, I love what happened 9/11, the World Trade Center. Okay. Yeah, but what went down with the Twin Towers? So even what was called the World Trade Center was known for its twin towers. It wasn't just one center. It was multiple centers. So even our language betrays us, that centering, the whole concept of centering, conflicts with this go forth. Go to the far side of the desert. Jesus says, go forth. Go to beyond. Jesus always pushing the boundaries. You don't discover new lands. Moses didn't go to the far side of the desert, the other side, and into the mountainous regions without losing sight of the center where his home was. So let's get our metaphors right, and let's start talking about what it means to be edge people. And let's talk about moving from centering prayer to edging prayer, to edgy prayer, to edgy people. Now, the tribe that was most on the edge was the tribe of Issachar, and they were the semiotic tribe, the tribe that knew the times and knew what to do. Every tribe had an animal totem, and the animal for the tribe of Issachar was the donkey, and the only animal you can trust your life to. Why? Because what do you use to climb the Grand Canyon? You don't use horses, you use donkeys. Why? Because the donkey will always keep you on the edge, but will never lead you off the edge. That's exactly who we are. We stay on the edge so that we will never go off the edge. But we are called to live, at the center, but at the edges simultaneously. But creativity and energy come from the edges. They do not come from the center. So let me just say about a few things about each one of these real quick, and then just to kind of prime your pump a bit as you call people to go to the leading edge. Now, the leading edge is the place where you're going upstream like a salmon. You're going upstream because people are not going in that direction. So you're going upstream, and you're experiencing some resistance. You've always got to be, you want to bring people with you, so you always have to be careful of what has been drilled into me by my family. Leonard, you always got to remember there's such a thing as one oddness too many. And so when you're on the edge, especially the leading edge, you got to, okay, is this the one oddness too many that people will just not go with us? And so we got to be careful of the one oddness too many. And people just don't get it. And I'll never forget one example of a leading edge moment was in 1991, or late 80s. I was actually mid 80s. I became the youngest president of a seminary in the U.S. in my early 30s. And 1985, I became president of this seminary, and called United Seminary. It was founded by the father of Orville and Wilbur Wright, Bishop Milton Wright, in 1871. And I needed some fundraising. I needed help. So I got Willie Nelson to help me. And he helped do some fundraising for the seminary. We had a rural ministries program, and we tried to celebrate not just the big churches, but the small churches. And he was really into helping. His grandma raised him. She was a Methodist. So he had an idea, and he was helping doing these concerts, and the money proceeds would go to the seminary. And in 1991, his son committed suicide, Wild Bill. And this was a terrible moment. We were trying to get Wild Billy, to come to the seminary and study, and Willie had his hopes that this may really help him. And before we could get him there, he took his life. And so part of his therapy, Willie said, is he and Bobby just went into an old church. And with nobody there, they set up a recording studio. And Bobby's sister is pianist sister. And he and Bobby just opened up an old, it wasn't a Methodist hymnal, it was a Baptist hymnal. They opened up a Baptist hymnal, and the two of them just sang their hearts out, these old songs. And so he presents this to me as a fundraiser. He says, Len, this is totally raw. It is just pure emotion, pure heart. But I think everybody's so tired of all the production and all of the high, heavy orchestration of sound. I think there's a market for just raw, real. Now, he didn't use this word, but you've heard it, unplugged music. And so he hands me an album. Says, use it. All the proceeds can go to the seminary. This was my therapy for my son's death. And I want to give it to the seminary. And so I had somebody that was very familiar with the seminary and an ally of the seminary in the music business. I gave it to that person. And that person said, there's nothing, we can't do anything with this. We can't do anything with this. He said, it's just, there's no backup singers, there's no wall of sound, it's just raw, just the music. And I said, yeah, but Willie says that there's too much orchestration, that there's a market for just... In other words, we were on the leading edge, but nobody got it. And so that sat there. Seminary didn't use it, and just this past year, Willie came out with an album that he had initially given to the seminary, but he and Bobby unplugged raw, just real music, old gospel music from an old Baptist hymnal. You can be on the leading edge. You're not always going to get people to follow you, but he started this whole, he sensed this whole unplugged movement, and that became a whole genre. Then there's the cutting edge. The cutting edge is where you start to bleed a bit. This is where you will strike a nerve, you'll go against the grain, and you will get some splinters. So it'll cut. That's what it means to take up your cross. When you take up that cross and you go on the edges, you're going to get some splinters in your back, and you're going to get some scars in your back. Leading edge is, you're not scarred that much, but you start doing the cutting edge. You move beyond the leading edge to the cutting edge, you get scarred. And the First Vatican Council, I'll never forget, a bishop actually stood up before the whole council and asked for some healing with Protestants. This is 1859 to 1869, 1869 to 1870, the First Vatican Council. And as soon as he asked for healing with Protestants, and that we could talk to them and start mending some fences and building some bridges, he was shouted down, and his whole career crashed in the hierarchy. He is on, now Pope Francis, that's all he's doing. He sounds sometimes, you want to say sometimes, is the Pope Catholic? There was an old saying, well, of course, is the Pope Catholic? But now you're asking, it's a question, because he doesn't sound Catholic at times, he sounds so. Then there's the bleeding edge. When you go to the bleeding edge, cutting edge people touch a nerve, bleeding edge people tap an artery. And the bleeding edge is where you begin to really sacrifice and suffer. Johann Jacob Wettstein, 1693 to 1754, he was an early New Testament scholar who was a biblical, who really reveled in the early manuscripts, and he wanted to, how accurate were these early manuscripts? Had they been the earliest manuscripts we have of the Gospels? We don't have any of the original writings that came from the first and second century of what we call the New Testament. And so he's trying to, could there have been maybe some Latin corruptions? And he's just asking questions today that every good biblical critic is asking. And for that, he lost his parish, he got accused of heresy. For him to move the church into now, we've been in the higher critical mode for 200 to 300 years. I think we need to move to post-critical, but we needed, God put us in an age of reason for a reason. And so here one of the people that brought us into it and pioneered it, it totally cost him his career, his ministry, his parish, his reputation as a scholar. And now we thank God for his pioneering work and research and questions. In 1990, early 90s, I opened up a store in West Virginia, town of 200, called Sweet's Body and Soul Cafe and Mountain Store. It was an attempt to show the church how to use coffee and to bring in good coffee. I did a book on it called A Cup of Coffee at the Soul Cafe. We only served quality coffee. This is a time when the worst coffee in town was served on Sunday morning in churches. And the only thing we sold were stories. We sold products, but we didn't feature the product. We featured the story. I even sold products I hated, but I loved the story. So the coffee had a story, the ice cream had a story, the shoes that we sold had a story, the handicrafts had it, what we featured. This is early 90s. You can tell I bled. I mean, I cashed in part of my pension to do this, and I bled, but I'm so glad I did, because it showed the church the possibility of what it means to have coffee moments and quality coffee and a cafe culture, to move the church in a new direction. And then there's the Edge, which is a place for martyrs. I open up my Bible. I always thank God for William Tyndale. So I can read the Bible in English today. William Tyndale, he didn't get massive royalty payments. He didn't get a Pulitzer Prize in the early 16th century, 1500s. He got burned at the stake. First person to translate the Bible from Greek and Hebrew into English, and he didn't get celebrated for it. He got martyred for it. The Edge. God's not calling us all to be martyrs. But I'm wondering if the church hasn't done a better job at incarnating the gospel in this digital culture, in this 21st century. Because some of us have been hedging at the center, not edging at the leading edges, the cutting edges, the bleeding edges, and the ledges themselves. No burning bush. No story from Genesis to the maps without Moses moving away from the safe places, going to the far side of the desert, where there's this scary mountain with a burning bush coming out of its side. Be an edge person. Teach your people to be edge and edgy disciples. Semiotics is the art of angling, of turning things askew, upside down, inside out, cattywampus, sunny side up, over easy, scrambled, hard-boiled. We hope you enjoyed today's journey, but always remember, it's more important you prepare the preacher than you prepare the sermon.